In this chapter, we are only going to be focusing on refining and fine tuning the hair groom on the beard and the mustache. While doing this process, based on what I see on the test renders, I'm going to be going back and forth between the beard and mustache grooms for the character. So right now, I'm just trying to fine tune the shape of the guides. I'm just making sure the effect selected only is switched on so that I can only shape selected strands. And again, to select this strand, you just need to hold on to Shift and left mouse button. Hold Shift and click with left mouse button to select the strand and make sure Effect Selected Only is switched on. And whenever you find the viewport being too slow, you can just turn off the other operators in the operator stack so that you only see the guides. Since we're only going to be covering the essential basics in this workshop, we are not going to be going too detailed into adding dynamics and creating braids. But I will go through the prime basics of how to add dynamics to the hair in Ornatrix. It's really simple and really stable. And the best part is that you can use the solvers within Maya and you can connect them to Ornatrix dynamics to add any kind of hair turbulence and such. So here, now that I've made some changes, I made a quick test render and I was going back and forth between the previous render to see how much of a difference it made and if it looked good or not. And I keep rotating my camera constantly to make sure whatever the change that I'm making to the guides, it's looking good from all the other angles. And since this beard is not too long, I can actually get away with not adding dynamics to this character when I'm animating. So I can just use the hair as it is once the grooming is done, and I can just start animating the character, and I can just start rendering without worrying about adding dynamics. Like if I have twice the length of the beard right now, then I would have to add dynamics to get that follow through for the beard. And the reason I kept the beard to this length is because I want to get away with not adding dynamics, because I don't really have the power of render farm to cache all the dynamics data, animate the hair and everything. Because right now, the character itself has about, say, 8K textures. And I'm also rendering in 1080p, because that 1080p is the maximum I can go with my computer right now, because if I render any higher, it's going to take much longer, and that's going to be much more expensive to render the whole sequence, because the short film is going to be about 5 minutes. So even if I'm going with 5 minutes, it's still a pretty long cinematic to render, which could end up having around, say, 7,000 frames. And if you calculate that per each frame, say if each frame is being rendered at 1 to 2 minutes, it's still going way higher. And that's only for the head. And once I add the body with the armor and everything, and also the environment, the render times are going to be even much longer. So I had to plan better so that I can keep everything to a minimum, but at the same time not compromising on the quality of the cinematic. So I just have to be smarter when it comes to adding detail to the character. And a quick tip when you're working on your own cinematic, have the faces revealed for the main characters if you want to show off your skills in animation or modeling. And for all the henchmen or all the other background characters, I would just put some kind of helmet or a mask on them so that you don't really have to worry about rigging the faces. So keep the detail only for the primary characters, like for the antagonist and the protagonist. But again, just be clever when it comes to designing and the detail that you add for your characters. And do not ever compromise on the quality. From my experience, what I learned is that when you're having a character with facial hair and clothing with all the follow through and everything, keep the rig as a separate file without any textures or any kind of hair or anything on it. And have another scene file with your final mesh, which means that character in that scene file should have the clothing, the hair, and everything that you want for the final render on it. The reason for that is once you're done animating your rig, you just need to cache out the geometry from that file and import the cached geometry onto the mesh of the character that you saved up in a different scene for the final render. So that you will be minimizing the risk of crashing your scene because you're only bringing in the geometry. So only the geometry is moving and there are no nodes or any kind of complex connections going on in the background for the software to calculate. So all we are doing in the end is that the geometry is being animated using the cache and the hair is following the geometry. And that's about it. So the software is only calculating the textures, geometry, and the hair. So there won't be any risk of crashing your scene when you're rendering, and it would be much lighter. So the scene render also will be much faster. I'm going to do a quick test render here to see the changes and compare that to the reference images that I have. That looks much better now that it's much thicker. So in the next chapter, I'm going to have a quick walkthrough of how to add dynamics to hair. So I'm going to conclude this chapter here, and I'll see you in the next chapter.